Hey guys, my name is Bex from the Tiny Fibre Studio podcast, and you are very welcome to week 6 of the plymagazine 51 yarns spin along. This week, week 6 is 2-ply. For those of you who are new to this series, I am doing a video each week which corresponds with plymagazine's 51 yarns spin along. You can find the list of topics on their website, which I will link to below. And if you enter a photo of your spin along on Instagram, Facebook or Ravelry, you stand the chance to win a year's subscription to plymagazine, which is pretty cool. I am not sponsored by or affiliated with plymagazine in any way. I just use it as a resource and I find it helpful. If you want to find me on Instagram, I am Tiny Fibre Studio on there, and on Ravelry I'm Ibex. So with that, let's dive in to week 6, which is 2-ply. So I have to say that this was a little bit of a tricky one, even though it seemed quite simple. I initially thought, well, everybody who spins knows about 2-ply, but I don't know how often we really sit and consider 2-ply and how we ply and all of that stuff. So I just thought it'd be interesting to kind of discuss the topic. A couple of resources that I was looking at over this week were Yarnitecture by Gillian Moreno, and there's a section on page 82 where there are sample swatches knitted up and it compares how 2-ply relates in terms of stockinette, in terms of lace and cables. So when you use 2-ply for each of those things, how does it fare? I think it's reasonably well known that 2-ply is very good for lace because it's an oval yarn. It just opens up the holes in the lace that much more, and you can really see those holes much better than you could with anything above 2-ply. And cables tend to be a lot flatter than they would with a rounder yarn like a 3 or a 4 or 5-ply. So that was Yarnitecture, and no doubt there's a lot more information that you might want to dive into there, but that's a good starting point. And the second one was the Spinner's Book of Yarn Designs by Sarah Anderson, which has a section on plying basics on page 71, and it talks about the effects of tension when you're plying. And this kind of got me thinking about the way that we tension our yarns when we're plying. So that was something that I wanted to have a little experiment with in this video. Just as a bit of an example, recently I have not really spun that many 2-ply yarns because I've definitely gravitated towards 3-ply. It's a real favourite of mine. But this one was World of Wool Carded Corriedale, good old World of Wool. It's really soft and squishy, and the colour's fantastic. I think the colourway is Sunflower. This was done when I was having a very stressful time and I just wanted to spin something and I didn't really care what it was. So I just kind of threw this at the wheel and it came out as 2-ply. No, there was a little bit of consideration about this because I did think originally that I might use it for something involving lace, hence why I did a 2-ply rather than 3-ply. I was looking through my finished handspun yarns and I came across this one, and it's a really good example of something that I would do differently now. I think this was a pretty early yarn, probably within my first 6 months or so of spinning, and it is really, really severely underplied. I mean, there's a section here where there are probably about 4 twists per inch, and this is like a very light sock weight, maybe lace weight yarn. That needs a significant amount more twist, and now that I'm looking at it again, I'm really desperate to just throw this back through the wheel and put some more twist in it, because it pains me to see something that severely underplied. Because this was an early yarn, I wasn't sampling or doing any of that stuff. Yeah, who needs sampling? I thought to myself, well, clearly I need sampling if things are going to come out that severely underplied. So I would love to throw that back through the wheel and stick a bit more twist in it. and no doubt I will do that in the near future. I'm going to leave this out, I'm not going to put this away so that I remember that it needs doing. But as my little demonstration or actual bit of spinning for this week, I have to be honest, I was kind of focusing a lot on the tailspinning episode, which will be next week. I've never tailspun before in my life, so I was wanting to put a little bit of prep in for that. And I realised that I didn't really have any singles. So I spun these up, one of them in my lunch break today. So there's not very much of this grey one, but I spun them up on my Acreworks drop spindles. The Acreworks Lazy Kate, if you haven't seen this configuration before, you can pop up all 4 of the shafts on the Lazy Kate and then use the Tensi tamers to create a little holder for your drop spindle shafts. So that's what I've done with those, and I'm going to use those as a bit of an example of plying. I'm using the Shat Matchless because my mini spinner has something else on it right now and I didn't want to disturb that. So I'm just going to get the twist going in the leader a little bit in the anti-clockwise direction because these have been spun in the clockwise. So let me just get these joined in and then we will talk a little bit about plying. I guess one of the really important things is to actually think about your intentions for the yarn when you're starting to spin the singles, which is the mistake that I made with that teal skein. I didn't really think about that, and now I'm in the situation where it really needs redoing. If I had taken the time to sample with that, I probably would have realised that it needed a bit more singles twist so that I could add more ply twist at this stage. Okay, so that's joined into the leader. So I have 1 strand of blue and 1 strand of pink. And the thing that I wanted to show was how different it can be depending on how you actually hold your yarn. So for a balanced 2-ply, you would want to tension your yarn pretty much as evenly as you can and think about controlling the angle at which your yarns come together. Judith Mackenzie chooses this technique where you kind of scoop a yarn up in between each of your fingers or your thumb and your finger, and that way if you've got multiple plies you can scoop them all up and get equal tension on each of them. And if you intentionally or purposefully spun your singles in order for them to be plied together, you will of course have done a sample of that, won't you? So you'll have an idea of a starting point when it comes to, you know, how many twists per inch you want to put in there. So you can keep an eye on that and you can keep judging that against your sample that you spun. But I wanted to just show that it does make a difference where you hold your yarns or how you hold them. So if I start bringing this pink yarn more out to the side, you'll see that I can kind of create little wraps. And you know, that comes in useful if you're trying to create a little art yarn. You can kind of move it up and down so that you get those extra wraps. But you can see with that, the blue yarn is pretty much straight. And the pink yarn is coming around at all kinds of different angles. And it's kind of fun to do that sometimes, but if it's not your intention to do that, then you probably need to reconsider and try to make sure that the yarns come together at roughly the same angle. So as I say, I use the Judith Mackenzie technique just because she's the only person that I've ever had a spinning lesson from. But you might have your own way, you might have a way that you find easiest. And I would use this even if I had tensioning on my lazy Kate. So even if I was using the Acreworks lazy Kate as I normally would, and, you know, putting bobbins onto it and putting tension on those bobbins with the Tensi tamers, I would still use that same technique because it just allows you to apply a little bit more human tensioning. If I let those go and just kind of let them do their own thing, then the ply twist kind of gets a little bit all over the place. So I use my thumb and forefinger to just guide up and down, forward and back, to get a relatively even tension. Now, my apologies that these yarns were not particularly spun with this in mind, so there might be some variations in thickness and so on, but hopefully you can kind of see what I mean. And of course, 2-ply can also be the start of inclusion type of art yarns as well. So if you wanted to do things like including sequins or buttons or anything else, obviously a 2-ply is the start of that as well. So reflecting on it, 2-ply can be just a nice, normal, balanced yarn, or it can be the start of an art yarn, depending on what you want to do with it. I think 2-plying is one of those things that we can get a little bit complacent about because we think it's just 2-ply, you know, it does what it does. But there's so much more to it when you really stop and think. And so if you are watching this as you're about to go into your spin along for week 6, that's something that you might want to reflect on. There are incidentally weeks coming up, certainly for coiled yarn. So you might want to save the coiling techniques for that point, but it's just kind of interesting to play around with the angle that each yarn is coming in at so that you can see the effect that it has. So apologies for a slightly rushed episode this week. The days when I intended to film this episode, other stuff cropped up, and I've just come home from work and I had about 40 minutes to shoot this episode. And it normally takes quite a lot longer than that, so I'm aware that this may come across as a slightly rushed episode, and that would be true, that would be fair to say. Next week is Tailspinning. I'm trying not to build up your expectations for that because I have not had a huge amount of practice at tailspinning, let's say, but I've got some stuff lined up for that, so I hope that you will join me again next week. And in the meantime, as I said at the beginning, you can find me on Instagram as Tiny Fibre Studio, on Ravelry I'm Ibex. And if you haven't done so already, I would love it if you would hit the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on any episodes. And also spread the word if you can, if you've got anybody else that you think might be interested in this. Feel free to share this as much as you would like. So I hope this was useful and enjoy your 2-ply spinning this week, and I will see you again next week.